Good evening and welcome to SnapShot. Tonight we cover the growing outrage over a transgender pedophile being housed in a women's prison in Victoria. Autumn Tulip Harper raped his own 5-year-old daughter on camera for the pleasure of an American pedophile master known as Samuel Booth, sending him 77 child abuse files. Despite this barbaric and heinous crime of a father raping his own daughter, County Court Judge Nola Karapakon-Tidis only sentenced Harper, who was given the court pseudonym Hillary Maloney in the court documents, to a minimum of 2.5 years in prison with a maximum of 4.5 years. In her judgment, she accepted arguments by his defense that he was vulnerable and manipulated by this American pedophile, stating in her judgment, Booth encourages and instructs you to engage in a variety of sexual and perverse acts with your daughter. You felt tied to Booth because you were not in a good mental state. Booth seemed to care, which is not something you'd had much of. You feel your life has gone terribly and everything got worse. At first, he was attentive and caring and someone with whom you could share every aspect of your daily life. Harper felt the man she connected with cared for him and was nice to her, and due to her low self-esteem, lack of assertiveness, loneliness, submissiveness, and desperation to be noticed and cared for, it was easy for him to pick up on her vulnerability and manipulate her into the master-slave relationship where he took control of her life. He then involved her in sexual exchanges and then coerced her to sexually abuse her daughter and take videos and photos to share with him. She, Harper, was not inherently motivated by deviant sexual interests or any other motive except doing what he told her and keeping him happy to sexually abuse her daughter. You can tell in the judgment here that the judge is using the transgender pedophile's preferred pronoun. In a report for the court, forensic psychiatrist Dr. Rajan Darji said that Harper identified as a female, living as a female, and hormonally female, and exhibited a common pattern of sexual abuse seen in females. This is a pattern of sexual abuse which a more dominant male pressurizes, manipulates, and/or coerces a female who has access to a child to sexually abuse that child and/or make that child available to him to sexually abuse. A report was also made to the court on behalf of Harper by Whit Gorry, the coordinator of Beyond Bricks and Bars, which, according to a state government media release, provides culturally appropriate and holistic support to trans and gender diverse people at risk of incarceration and in prison, and also helps justice workers improve their understanding of the diverse needs of trans and gender diverse communities. The Allen Labor government has given Beyond Bricks and Bars $105,000 in taxpayer funds. This report by Whitgorry was taken into consideration by Judge Karapakon-Tidis at Harper's pre-sentencing hearing. She said, in Mr. Gorry's experience working with trans women in the prison system, all have also reported transphobic bullying and harassment, along with sexual harassment and abuse within the custodial environment. He also referred to some of the common difficulties and delays around receiving appropriate monitoring hormone replacement therapy in custody. Mr. Gorry considers that as a young trans woman, you would be particularly at risk in prison. I accept that Mr. Gorry has the expertise and experience to give evidence on these issues, and his evidence was not challenged. The report indicates that all trans women who enter the women's system are placed in solitary confinement upon reception and remain there for anywhere from 5 weeks to their entire prison sentence. Placement in longer-term solitary confinement is restrictive and has significant impacts on a person's mental health. Harper is currently being housed at the Dame Phyllis Frost Women's Correctional Centre in Ravenhall. There has been community outrage at not just the fact that a male child sex offender has been housed in a women's prison, but was given such a lenient sentence by a judge because they viewed their gender transition as reducing their criminal culpability. A campaign by Women's Forum Australia and reporting by News Corp newspapers and Sky News Australia is calling on the Allen Labor government to amend Corrections Victoria gender self-ID policies to prohibit all male prisoners from being housed in women's prisons. While it is wrong to suggest, as some feminists have, that women who are in prison in Victoria are themselves victims, you have to be a really bad girl to be sentenced to a term of imprisonment. In Victoria, Dame Phyllis Frost Prison is where triple murderer Erin Patterson is being housed. Though governments do have a duty of care to protect all prisoners from physical and sexual harm from other prisoners, this is why sex-segregated prisons were introduced in the first place. When Premier Jacinta Allen was first asked about a convicted transgender pedophile being housed in a women's prison on October 2, she deflected.
I think it would be deeply inappropriate for any Member of Parliament, Minister or Premier of the day to be reaching in to Corrections Victoria and directing the placement of any prisoner across the prison system. So let's be clear. There are strict and clear guidelines within which Corrections Victoria operate, and that includes the safety and well-being of all prisoners when it comes to the placement of individual prisoners, and that is the operational decisions that Corrections Victoria make every single day. And it's not just to guide the safety and well-being of prisoners, it's also to support the safety and well-being of staff. And I respect and support the work of Corrections Victoria to consider the placement of prisoners as appropriate across the prison system.
Liberal opposition leader Brad Batten promised that if he is elected Premier, no person convicted of sexual offences who is a biological male would be housed in a female prison.
The government can come out and create policy that says any person convicted of sexual offences who is a biological male should not be in a female prison. That's a policy then. That's not directed at one individual. That's directed at the others that have also been in the women's prison who have had a history of sexual violence. So if the government put that policy forward or put it in legislation or instructed those who are running the prison system to do that, that would be a very simple fix. And under a government I lead, we would do that.
You mentioned others, so this isn't a one-off.
Yeah, it's reported in the media this week. There's been others of similar circumstances where people have had sexual offences in the past and have been residing in a female's prison when they're biological males. So we believe in freedom of choice. I believe that you can identify however you like. That doesn't faze me or impact me. But when it does impact vulnerable people, particularly in the prison system, I think that needs to be taken into consideration.
Yep, I think many people would agree with you on that.
Federal Liberal leader Susan Ley cited Harper's lenient sentence as why there should be mandatory minimum sentences for Commonwealth child sex offences, such as transmitting child abuse material over the internet.
What is a fair jail sentence for a person who abused their 5-year-old daughter 19 times and filmed it? 10 years? 20? Life? In Victoria, they got just 4 years and 9 months and will be eligible for parole after 2.5 years. For the Commonwealth offences, only 6 months. That is not justice. The Coalition is calling for mandatory minimum sentences for producing or sharing child abuse material because crimes this horrific must mean real jail time.
Authorised by Susan Lee, Liberal Party, Canberra.
Some would argue a wood chipper is an appropriate mandatory minimum sentence for pedophiles, child rapists. Notice how Susan Ley was careful not to misgender a pedophile. Country Liberal Party Northern Territory Chief Minister Leah Finocchiaro said this week that her government's prison policy was clear.
I can't believe that we're seeing these woke agendas and these ideologically driven policy from Labor premiers and prime ministers who are putting the rights of people who identify as a woman, the rights of men who identify as a woman, above the rights of women who are vulnerable and in prison to be safe. We have very clear rules. Here in the Northern Territory, if you're a bloke, you go to a men's prison. If you're a woman, you go to women's prison. It's very clear cut. There are no shades of grey in this scenario in the Northern Territory.
Currently, all states and territories, plus the Commonwealth, have varying forms of transgender self-identification rules. A growing number of politicians, including from the One Nation Party and the Coalition, are lobbying for laws to revert back to biological reality to protect women and girls. At Senate estimates last week, Liberal Senator Claire Chandler stumped the Federal Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Dr. Anna Cody, at Senate estimates with a question about biological sex.
Did you mean that biological males can be women?
Men. So I think that we have different language that perhaps you're using than I would use. So I don't understand the term biological men.
Right. This might be a short tranche of questions there. No wonder Australian women are disappointed. Commissioner, you'd be familiar with the Victorian case of a male pedophile being housed in a women's prison. It's been in the media in the last week. For the purposes of the Sex Discrimination Act, do you consider that this man, who is a child sex offender, is a woman?
The Sex Discrimination Act includes trans women within it. So the person who I believe you're referring to is a trans woman.
Right. That was very revealing. My next tranche of questions.
But there was some good news this week with Victorian Corrections Minister Enver Erdogan informing the Victorian Parliament that he had asked Corrections Victoria to update their policies on prisoner placements, so safety and well-being and past offending were given greater weight. But Premier Jacinta Allen denied this was a policy backflip by her government.
Has the government backflipped on its position with the placement of transgender prisoners inside women's prisons?
No, what we have, and I believe the Minister has just addressed you on this matter, the Minister for Corrections has asked Corrections Victoria to provide some updated policy advice on the placement of prisoners in women's prisons, and this is entirely consistent with that broader policy setting about ensuring that the safety and well-being of both prisoners and staff is paramount when it comes to the consideration that Corrections Victoria undertake when they're placing individual prisoners.
Do you think the safety in this policy update will include the blanket banning of transgender behaviour?
Well, the Minister for Corrections has just gone into the detail of how he's asked his department to update the policy advice, and once that work has been concluded, then that policy will be in place and that further detail can be provided.
The case of this transgender pedophile is yet another example here in Victoria about how the rights of criminals and prisoners are put above the safety of Victorians. Autumn Tulip Harper could be back out on the streets before the end of the decade. Stay with us as we will continue to cover Victoria's crime crisis, including the latest violent crimes happening on our streets and the associated recent injustices. I'm Tim Wilms, and that's Snapshot. Good night.